looking at industrial accidents and when they're most likely to occur, if you start looking at a lot of the major industrial accidents that have happened, you'll start to see a trend repeating. A lot of the major accidents have occurred within the wee hours of the morning, naturally when our alertness levels are at their lowest. We also have 5 stages of sleep. People often think about sleep and think, okay, I need to get 8 hours. Well, it's not just the quantity of the sleep, it's also the quality of the sleep that's really important. When it comes to sleep, there's 5 stages. There's 2 light stages, there's 2 deep stages of sleep, and then we REM, we dream, REM, rapid eye movement. For the typical person, it's a 90-minute cycle to go from being awake to asleep. These are EEG recordings of brainwave activity through different stages of sleep. You can see in stage 3 and 4, deep sleep, the second last one from the bottom, was our brainwave patterns have slowed way down. These are called delta waves. If you've ever been woken up out of delta sleep, you suffer from what's called sleep inertia, right? We're very groggy. It takes us time to actually start processing thoughts correctly again. It doesn't feel very good being woken up out of delta sleep. However, if we take a 10-minute nap, that will keep us in a lighter stage of sleep. By the time I'm done talking, you'll want to nap, or if you're not napping already. So it's a 90-minute cycle, and if we take those 90-minute cycles and we map them throughout the night, it would look like this. We start off in lighter stages of sleep, and then we head into deep sleep, the red area on the graph. And then we come up and we dream, which is in that yellow area. We then drift back down into delta sleep again. And then we come up and we dream again. So we go through these nice, smooth cycles. While we're doing this, it's not unusual to have brief awakenings, as you can see in the graph, where we wake up for maybe a few seconds and we roll over and we go back to sleep again. We spend more time in delta sleep at the first half of our sleep, and then we spend more time dreaming in the second half of our sleep. There's different recuperation that's taking place during different stages of sleep, so it's important that we get enough of all of the stages. As I mentioned earlier, we use the CAT SmartBand to measure the quality and the quantity of the sleep. So a person would, if they were volunteered in one of our studies, they would wear this for 30 days. And we would also provide them with an app on their phones or on their iPad so they can then look at how well they were sleeping, how much sleep did they get during that period. We'll also provide them a report at the end of it, a written report. We measure alertness as well for the individuals, and you can see it says 94, alertness score of 94. We score the alertness from 0 to 100, 100 being perfect. 94 is a really good score, so that's really high. So this individual at this point had a 94. This is also a predictive technology. So if you were wearing this band and you wanted to see, okay, right now I'm 94, but what's my alertness going to be like in 4 hours from now? Well, the watch can also help you predict that. You would actually grab that line, and if you drag it to the right, it would tell you what your alertness, your predictive alertness score would be. There's predictive technologies as well in this. If you had 30 people participating in a study, you could have a supervisor console set up for those 30 individuals where you can review the alertness levels of those individuals and the predictive alertness levels in those individuals while you're assigning work. Whether or not industry's ready for that kind of aggressive change, I'm not sure. But that is here. You can also look at with the app, you can also look at the quality as well as the quantity of sleep I've had. For example, I'm looking at the last 7 days over on the right-hand part of the screen. It's looking at sleep over the last 7 days. What we often see happen when people participate in a study is they'll try to start beating their prior sleep. Well, last night I had 4 hours. I'm going to try to get 6 hours tonight. So you start making it somewhat of a game to keep improving your sleep, which is, again, positive behavior we're looking for. The research for this band came out of the U.S. military. It also came out of a study that was done by an Australian researcher called Dr. Drew Dawson, who was interested in the blood alcohol contents of those that were, we wanted to see the correlation between people who were drunk and people who were extremely fatigued. So what Dr. Drew Dawson did originally with this experiment is he took a group of individuals and he kept them awake for long periods of time. And then he put them through a battery of tests to see how they would perform. So for example, putting someone in a driving simulator or a flight simulator or doing simple mass summation when they've been deprived of sleep. He then took the same control group and he got them drunk. And then he put them through the same battery of tests to see how well they performed. And what we were able to ascertain out of the study is that somebody who's been awake for approximately 22 hours is equivalent to someone with a blood alcohol content of 0.08. Now, we would never accept people coming to work with blood alcohol content of 0.08. Unacceptable. Is it unusual to have people working at your site that have been awake for 22 hours? So I often think about, like, if you were having a conversation with one of your employees, maybe a driver on a truck, and you ask them, Joe, how are you feeling today? And if Joe said, I'm tired, I feel tired, but I'm okay. The supervisor might say, go get him, Joe, good job. Be safe out there. What if Joe was to say, I'm tired, I feel drunk? Right? It's a big difference. There's ways that we can ease these transitions when it comes to working days and nights. There's education that we can provide. There's fantastic educational programs out there to help people who work shift work and help adjusting to shift work. If you want to be a shift worker, I think you owe it to yourself to do it as safely as possible and to educate yourself to do it in a healthy way as well. We can prepare for working for night shifts. Adjust ahead of time. We can provide people education on sleep disorders to make sure they understand the ups and downs of sleep disorders. Educating them on what is insomnia, how is it treated, what can we do to prevent it. Educating individuals on sleep apnea. This is probably the one we hear about the most with people who work shift work, right? Obstructive sleep apnea. When it comes to sleep apnea, it's usually the person who sleeps with you that ends up diagnosing it, right? They'll tell you, oh, do you know that you snore really loud and then all of a sudden you just stop breathing and then you gasp for air, right? So sleep apnea actually pulls you out of deeper stages of sleep into lighter stages of sleep. And often the individual who suffers from it doesn't realize that they have sleep apnea. And we know, if you've been around this field long enough, you know that it's treatable. You can wear a CPAP machine to help treat it. When you start talking often to people who have been treated for sleep apnea, they'll tell you it's almost like a life-changing experience for them. I've had conversations with people who have apnea, and they'll tell me, before I had this CPAP machine, I used to sleep 8.5 hours. I never felt rested. Another common sleep disorder is restless leg syndrome. It's actually more common than apnea, where it's a sensation that you have in your legs. It's itching, twitching feeling where you move your legs around, trying to shake off this sensation so you can fall asleep. It's very disruptive. But again, treatable. Narcolepsy as well. Treating people or educating on narcolepsy, uncontrollable episodes of falling asleep. And then microsleeps. So what is a microsleep? Well, as the name suggests, it's a short burst of sleep. It's a small burst of sleep. It can last anywhere from a few seconds up to 30 seconds. I think once you get to 30 seconds, I'm starting to consider that a nap. So a microsleep is a short burst of sleep. When are you most vulnerable? When you have a sleep debt. If you're depriving yourself of sleep, you're putting yourself at further risk of having a microsleep. Think about your circadian alertness curve. The wee hours of the morning, I'm more vulnerable. At the afternoon lunch, when you feel yourself in the automatic behavior syndrome, if you're doing a task and you feel like you can do it without thinking, you're also very vulnerable for having a microsleep. It's almost a cue to do something different, to change your behavior. Increased hours of sustained wakefulness will also increase our chances. Precursors to microsleeps, blank stare. If you've been talking to someone and you kind of just see that they have a blank stare in their face and they're really not following your thought pattern, they might be fatigued and vulnerable. Dropping your head, jerking it back up again, slow, frequent blinking, sudden jerks of the body. Not being able to recall the last few minutes of talking is another example. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we actually have technology on our trucks that will detect microsleeps. If someone falls asleep, we'll have an alarm go off in the truck, and it'll wake the individual up. This is an example of someone having a microsleep actually operating a truck. You can see at the end of that he kind of had a jerk where his eyes open. Let me see if I can play it again. You see right at the end, his eyes opened again quickly. So that was the alarm going off in the truck. We've woken up many people with this technology. Many. As a fatigue expert, when Caterpillar acquired this technology, that's when I knew I wanted to work for them. They actually tried to recruit me before. When they had this technology, I knew that was a piece of technology. As a fatigue expert, I wanted to be around. As a fatigue expert, is there anything better than looking at videos like this and saying, I can say to myself, I played a role in waking this individual up. I'm not sure if he was going to have an accident or not, but I intervened. I was part of intervening in this. Here's another example. Now, I've seen video footage of people having microsleeps that can last. There's one I have, it's 30-something seconds the individual was asleep for. Typically, when we implement a project where we're introducing this technology, we'll go through 3 phases of the project. The first phase is we install the equipment that's necessary on the truck. We'll collect data in silent mode. We won't turn on alarms yet. So for the first 30 days, we'll install the equipment, and we collect data, and we calibrate the equipment within the truck. After the first 30 days, on day 31, we'll turn on the alarms. And we'll start waking people up. And it's an eye-opening experience for, of course, the driver when the alarm starts going off in the truck, because often they didn't realize they were having a microsleep. So that's phase 2. Phase 3, we then implement a fatigue intervention plan, an FIP. What do you do with people when they have fatigue events or multiple fatigue events? How do you manage those events? We typically recommend a 3-step process for managing events. So maybe the first event, somebody has a fatigue incident. Dispatch is contacted by Caterpillar headquarters. The information all goes through Caterpillar, by the way, so it'll go through our monitoring center. A monitoring center reviews the incident, and they contact dispatch at the site. Dispatch will then provide the information to the supervisor. They'll contact the driver and say, okay, there was a fatigue event just detected on the truck. The driver might say, yep, sure was. I was feeling a bit tired there. I was tired, but I'm okay now. And the supervisor might say, okay, Joe, are you safe to continue? And Joe might say, yes, I'm good to go. What do you do if there's a second event? So again, what we would recommend is you do a face-to-face with the driver. You can tell a lot by looking at someone. So you meet the driver. Okay, Joe, this was the second event within the same shift. How are you feeling? Joe might say, it was a pretty tough time. I didn't sleep well last night, but I'm feeling okay. If a driver has a third event, we recommend stopping the truck and putting him assigning them to something that's less safety sensitive. But again, each site would customize their own fatigue intervention plan, their own FIP. We want to help avoid accidents. What does an accident look like for you? This is a typical drift-off accident that occurred. Often indications of someone falling asleep. Incidents that happen that we really can't explain why. Or the driver won't admit to falling asleep in the first place. Again, it can be often a macho thing. Something ran out in front of me and I tried to swerve. What is fatigue? When you think of fatigue, what do you think of? Do you think of incidents like this? Or do you think of someone taking a nap? Often when we ask people, what does fatigue look like? They might say it looks like this. They're having 40 winks, right? Closing their eyes to rest. Or does fatigue look like this to you? It's important that we consider personal countermeasures, fatigue countermeasures, and educating individuals on fatigue countermeasures to make sure that they help mitigate fatigue. And I've talked about some of these earlier on. There's good programs out there to help mitigate fatigue. But again, there's also technology that helps us remain safer. And the technology keeps growing, and it keeps getting better. There's technology that will detect if somebody walks too close to a vehicle, an alarm goes off. As I mentioned, there's technology that will wake someone up if they fall asleep. There's technology that will notify you if somebody's using a cell phone or doing something dangerous while operating a truck, sorry. There's technology to measure fatigue. And the thing I always think about is if you can't measure it, how do you fix it, right? The hardest part is trying to measure it. Well, you can do a fatigue risk assessment to find out what your risk level is, and then you can implement countermeasures to deal with it. The one thing that I do encourage you to think about is any technology that you're going to implement, you need to consider change management. Having a comprehensive change management plan in place to educate the workforce. It's the key to any successful project as far as I'm concerned. Making sure that we educate. For example, if you're going to be putting a driver safety system on a truck and you're going to install a camera on the truck, how is the driver going to feel about that? Have you taken his feelings into consideration when it comes to that piece of technology? So anything that you do as far as changing it, anything you're implementing, I should say, as far as technology goes, or if you're even changing, if you're implementing a comprehensive fatigue risk management plan, I encourage you to think about change management for the site. Often we start off by educating the leadership force at the mine site first, where we would